Hi, and welcome to the Grant Professional Association's webinar titled So You Want to Be a Consultant. This is for immediate or advanced professionals. This is part one of the two-part series. The second part series is in January. Please feel free to look on the calendar, put that on your calendar, and everybody who is registered for this webinar is registered for the second part series as well, so you don't have to go and register for that. My name is Kelly Romero, and I am the Membership Director for GPA and your webinar moderator for today. You will be placed in listen-only mode, which means that you are on mute. If you would like to ask a question, please feel free to list your question in the left side of your screen in the chat box. We'll get to as many questions as time permits. At the end of the webinar, you will be directed to a very brief survey. Please fill that out and assist us with our future webinars and for the presenters' benefit as well. Today's presenters are Linda Lizakowski, she is an ACFRE, and Susan Schaefer, she's a CFRE. Linda is one of approximately 100 professionals worldwide to hold the Advanced Certified Fundraising Executive designation. In her 19 years as a philanthropic consultant, she has managed capital campaigns, helped dozens of nonprofit organizations achieve their development goals, and trained more than 22,000 professionals in all aspects of development. Linda is an AFP Certified Master Trainer and serves on the board of the AFP Foundation for Philanthropy. Susan Schaefer is a consultant, writer, and speaker who is passionate about the nonprofit sector. Her practical approach has made her a frequent presenter at conferences and in classrooms. She founded Resource Partners, LLC in 2001 with a mission to help nonprofits excel at fundraising and board development. Susan co-edited the Nonprofit Consulting Playbook, Winning Strategies from 25 Leaders in the Field, with Linda Lizakowski. She is currently co-authoring a book about serving on a nonprofit board. All of Linda and Susan's books you can find on the Charity Channel website as well as the GPA website, and GPA members do receive discounts. Susan and Linda, please feel free to dial *7 to unmute your line and begin your presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Susan Schaefer. Welcome to So You Want to Be a Consultant. This topic has been a passion of ours for a long time, and so Kelly, I thank you so much for allowing us this platform to speak with some GPA members. Linda and I have presented on topics similar to this at some GPA conferences, and it's been a very enthusiastic audience. So we'll be going over some of the basic topics for beginners, but as many of you know, if you're already a consultant, a lot of these topics still pertain. And Linda and I did just briefly compile a book a couple of seems like a couple of years ago now when we began, that provided insights from 25 different consultants. And the exciting thing about it was that we really affirmed the idea that there are so many paths to success in consulting. And so we'd love to take you through some of those, the bigger topics when you're getting your consulting practice up and running, and what some of those varied paths are to success. So with that, I will turn it over to Linda.
Okay, good morning or afternoon, everyone. And what I'm going to do is take you through a little bit of a survey, because we always like to know a little bit more about who is in our audience before we start. I know some of you have probably been consulting for quite a while. Some are probably just thinking about consulting, and some are maybe in the consulting business. Maybe you've hung out your shingle, but you're really just a novice at this. So if you would take a minute to fill out our survey, we'll have a better idea then of what our audience is, and you'll also have a better idea of who's on the line with you. And I think some people are still filling out, but it looks like most of you have answered already. So let's take a look at what our audience looks like. And almost half of you are really just thinking about this. We have no one who's less than 6 months. That's unusual. But we have some people who have been in 6 months to a year, and some more than a year, which probably means those are who are already in consulting and not quite 6 months yet, or either so new to this, or they're just so busy getting started that they haven't had time to attend a webinar. So this gives us a little bit of an idea, and as we suspected, most of you are really just thinking about this. So we'll try to gear most of our conversation to those who are fairly new at the consulting field, we do have another session coming up in January, which will be a little bit more advanced for some of you who are in the profession. But I hope those of you who have been consulting more than a year will still be able to learn something valuable out of today's session. So I'm going to turn it back over to Susan and let her talk a little bit about why people even are possibly thinking about consulting.
Great. Thank you, Linda. So if you have not begun yet, there are a lot of myths associated with why people might want to go into consulting. There are also some very terrific perks as well. So these are probably some of the things you're most familiar with in your own thinking about it. The idea of better hours, yes, there may be better hours in what your job currently entails, but I would say that oftentimes there are more hours as a consultant, particularly when you're new and even when you get things up and running. And I have to say that my last nonprofit sector job had a very long commute, a fair amount of travel, and yet I still spend much more time in my consulting work than I did as a nonprofit professional because it really never ends. If you choose to make it that way, like any small business, you've really got to figure out some parameters for yourself, particularly if you work from home. So that said, more pay is something that a lot of people consider. We all get dollar signs in our eyes at some point. And this is another kind of yes but, that there may be more pay when you hear about the hourly fees, but we all have to budget for the ups and downs associated with having this type of income stream, and that is one that really fluctuates sometimes wildly. There could be seasonal work that you get depending on the type of consulting you prefer to do. We all know that grants in particular have their seasonal ups and downs, and there are many points where you are going to spend your workday not doing any sort of billable work, but you'll be marketing yourself, you'll be doing your bills, you'll be talking with colleagues to get advice on things. So you certainly can make a nice living in this field. However, even the best of us really have to learn to deal with the inconsistencies in income. Freedom to set your own schedule is maybe what I consider a yes. Maybe. You certainly can set your own schedule, and I'd say of all the types of consulting, grant writing is probably the most flexible. I did start out my consulting as a grant writer, and that was terrific. As a matter of fact, I did so when my children were very little, and it was a terrific way to stay in the field and have the utmost flexibility. So if you do plan to continue to do grants, then I think that the flexibility is certainly one of the biggest perks because obviously you need somewhat minimal time face-to-face with your clients, and you can do a lot of the work from home or in office and do it at your leisure, whatever hours work best for you. If you decide to go a bit outside of the grants realm and want to deal more one-on-one with clients, then the freedom to set your own schedule lessens a bit the more you need to be in front of people. So what about the ability to work at home? Well, again, grant writers have a special place in that piece. I think that's certainly one of the areas where it works best, although as we will talk about a little more as we go on, the idea of working at home is really dependent on your own personality. And some people very quickly find that they love working from home, and others find that everything suddenly becomes a distraction. A lot of consultants who are not suited to work at home even tell me that the things that they despise doing in their homes, like laundry, suddenly become a real draw when you've got big deadlines looming. So you really have to get to know your own personality, and people who decide they cannot work from home do find all sorts of options these days in terms of renting offices and getting virtual space, temporary space. So there are a lot of options without having to spend a lot of money. And how about the variety of work? That is certainly a perk of consulting because you can take the jobs you want to take. you can really focus on the types of work that you want to do. And I would say just keep your standards high, even at the beginning. Don't take every job that comes along. Really try to target your efforts and seek out and accept the jobs that are most interesting to you and most along the lines of the business plan that you set. So that said, that's just our very beginning introduction, but we want to take another little poll to see why it is that you all are interested in consulting. So if you wouldn't mind filling this out, it will allow us to focus a little bit. And Linda, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. And this will be interesting to see your reasons for wanting to consult. I was kind of chuckling to myself as Susan was reading off the better hours and more pay, because I think a lot of times I have found, and many of you will probably find, that yes, you can set your own hours, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be any less. You might think, well, this is great. I only have one client consult that I'm going to be at a client's office all day Monday, but the rest of the week I have to myself. Well, you find that you're doing client work in your office. You're doing the marketing, as Susan mentioned, and many other different things. So I think it's always interesting to see what people find attractive about this. And I have to say that in my case, the freedom to set your own schedule and the variety of work were really big motivators for me. And interestingly, I think those are probably the two biggest things that you have said too. So maybe I'm not alone in that. We do have some people who are between jobs, and lots of times people think that they're going to do consulting, but maybe they're not really going to take it seriously. Maybe they're going to do consulting just until they find a real job, as some people have said. So, and that's fine too, as long as your clients are aware that you may not be in this for the long haul. It's interesting that so few of you actually are motivated by more pay, and I think that's good for those of you who are just starting out, because it does take several years in most cases to build up your business. Now, some people have been fortunate enough to leave a job and maybe their current employer is their first and biggest customer for quite a while, but others start pretty much at ground zero, and it takes you a while to build up your business. So I'm kind of delighted to see the result of this. The better hours, as I say, may not be less hours, but it might be better hours for you, that you can at least be flexible and work into your own schedule. It looks like also a number of you are interested in the ability to work at home. And we'll talk a little bit more about where is the best place to work, whether you should work at home or work in an office. But for a lot of you, I think working at home is really big, especially if you have younger children, or maybe you're just in a situation where you think working at home will make your life a lot easier. And in fact, I think it does for most of us. I've done both, worked in an office with my consulting practice and worked at home. And once I started working at home, I can't imagine why I ever spent the money to rent an office. So I think it's kind of interesting to see all the results that we have. But for most of you, it's the ability to work at home and freedom to set your own schedule that seem to be, and the variety of work is also interesting. That was one of the things also that attracted me to consulting, because I tend to get bored very easily, and I think it's good for you to know your own limitations and your own capabilities. And if you are someone who gets bored easily in one job, consulting is an ideal way to really get out and work with a number of different clients. Now, sometimes people like to focus in one particular area, so we're going to be talking about that. I just see we do have a comment here from someone who says, one of the largest attractions for me is the lack of needing to be location specific. I can work from any state, not just the location of my clients, and I think that's a really interesting one. It also has some consequences for you financially if you're going to be working in multiple states, as we'll talk about a little bit later, with things like registration and taxes and all of those things to be concerned about. But let's talk about what kind of consultant you want to be, because there are many different ways that people can consult, and there are many different options. But one of the things that I think is really, first of all, important is to talk about whether or not you are really cut out to be a consultant, because sometimes some people are not cut out to be consultants. So we've kind of contrasted here some of the things that make consulting attractive or maybe not so attractive for some of you. If you're working in an employment situation where we sometimes refer to that as a captive employer, not that they have you behind bars, hopefully, but that you're working for one particular agency, there is the benefit of teamwork. And I know I've worked with some consultants. In fact, I had someone doing some work for me as a subcontractor who started out consulting on her own and realized that she really missed the teamwork. She liked being a team player and being part of a team at work. And when she went into consulting on her own, she said she wasn't happy doing that. So sometimes if you're that type of a person and you're going to be working alone, it may be really tough for you to have that independence. Others might be more like me. I really enjoy the independence and working independently, and I find I get a lot more done, which is one of the reasons that I decided to move from an office to working at home, because even when I had a staff and subcontractors who came in to the office and worked, I found that teamwork was good in some ways, but in other ways it distracted me from what I really wanted to be doing and what I needed to be doing, the things like marketing. The other option is, income instability. For some people, they really need to be dependent on a stable paycheck. And if that's the situation, if you're a single parent, for example, you may not be able to deal with a consulting life because that instability might just be something that you're not willing to take the risk on. And if you find that you're staying up nights because you're not sure where your next paycheck is coming from, then maybe employment life is more up your alley. Multitasking is important, I think, in almost every situation. And I think most of the people on our call are females, and I think that's kind of interesting because this is definitely becoming more of a female-dominated topic. And as females, I think we're very accustomed to multitasking. It seems like most of us do it all the time. And while you're probably doing that in your job, in your full-time job, if you're still in that position, when you get into consulting, you're going to be doing what we call wide-ranging multitasking, because you're not only balancing different projects for one client, but you're probably also balancing, I've had anywhere from as many as, or as few as 2 or 3 clients at a time, to as many as 10 or more clients at a time. And when you're trying to multitask different clients and different projects, it can be quite challenging. So if you're not good at multitasking, consulting, again, may not be the career for you. The other ability to focus on one mission, I think, is really important. And I've always said to people when I give them career advice as far as looking for a career in fundraising, that you really need to find an organization you feel passionate about so that you can focus on that mission. And that is really easier to do in an employment situation than it will be in consulting. However, I've always found that I've been much more successful with clients when I do believe in their mission. But sometimes you might be focusing on different missions at the same time. And those of you who decide not to specialize in a particular type of client, you may have a healthcare client, you may have an arts client, you may have a human service client, you may have an education client, all at the same time. So while I think it's maybe a little bit more challenging to focus on the missions, one of the things that I found about the variety of work is that you learn a lot. It's a learning and living experience as you start to work with more different types of clients, and I've always enjoyed that focus of, gosh, it's really neat to learn a little bit more about the arts and a little bit more about healthcare, and you find that you get involved in different client missions, and it can be a very rewarding experience for you. The other thing about consulting that's different is even though maybe you work long hours in your job, most of us in a full-time job, our hours are pretty predictable. We know there are some times when grant deadlines are due or a special event is coming up and it's going to take a lot of hours during those couple of months. But with consulting, you might have some really weird hours, particularly for those of you who are looking at consulting nationwide and in grant writing, that's certainly a great option for you because you can work almost across the country. But that might mean very strange hours. I sometimes get phone calls at 6 a.m. asking if it's too early, and they're thinking it's 9 o'clock because they're on the East Coast and I'm in Pacific time. So those are some things that you have to be aware of. I actually have a client in Bermuda, and I get on the phone with them at 5 a.m. So there's some things that can be really, really tricky about the strange hours that we have as consultants. And of course, in an employment life, we're accustomed to a pretty firm schedule. So again, some people like being in a firm schedule that they know they're working from 8 to 5 or whatever their hours are. With consulting, you're probably going to have to be a lot more flexible. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan and let her talk to you about what kind of consultant you want to be, because there are a lot of different options available to you.
Great. Thank you, Linda. That was terrific. And this time of year, I think I can vouch for you about those strange hours. It's definitely one of those times of year where you're up early and up late. But that it's a good sign. It's a good thing, but grants people in particular know how that goes. Anyway, so in terms of what kind of consultant you want to be, I think it's probably a good assumption that many on the line right now are probably interested in being somewhat single-focused, meaning doing some kind of grants-related work. But even that can be subdivided a bit into grant writing, grant management, foundation relations even. I did a fair amount of consulting myself where I was really advising and still do advise groups on how to approach foundations. So that was, for a long time, a nice divergence for me from just the writing piece alone. And then you might even decide to broaden at some point into general writing. A fair amount of grants people later on go on to writing case statements or appeals. Certainly if you haven't done that kind of work yet, you should get some great training before you launch into it. But as you will quickly see, clients who find you successful in one field are often very anxious to see if they can bring you into other pieces, because once you're a trustworthy resource to them, they quickly look to see how else they might use you. So really think about how focused you'd like to be. And then will you be even a full service piece at some point? If your specialty is in grants, you probably won't start doing campaigns or that sort of thing. But you might, number one, decide to move into that piece. In my case, I did work in grants for a long time, although, and this was before I was a consultant, but I did have a degree in nonprofit management. I was on a lot of boards and really just happened to get jobs that had to do with grants and foundation relations. I was chomping at the bit as a consultant to be more broad-based. But to be honest, when I started consulting, people really saw me as the grants lady. And so it took me a long time to really spread my wings and feel like I could sell myself with that full range of experience. So think about your goals and what you'd like to do, and gradually you will get there. It's also terrific to start thinking about what kind of business model you want ultimately. A lot of people are happy being a sole proprietor forever, and then there are some who really look forward to the day where they want to have a large shop. And grants people increasingly are doing that. They're hiring employees and subcontractors. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But really all the options are open to you. And along the lines, these are all elements of a great business plan. So look at any good business book, and it'll also tell you to figure out who your target audience is. Do you want a single focus? Do you just want to look at higher education institutions, just grassroots health and human service groups? It's really, a lot of people really develop a niche and a name for themselves by pursuing just one of those kinds of disciplines. And then along those lines as well, do you want to work with just larger institutions or smaller groups? If you're a grant writer with a smaller group or even do grants administration, you may end up being a de facto staff person, not in a legal sense. You do want to look up, and Linda will talk about this later. You want to make sure that you walk that fine line between a consultant and a staff person, but you may end up being someone who really takes on almost all of an organization's functions in the grants world if you're at a smaller organization. If you're at a larger group, you might do what I did for many of my clients, which is get pulled in just for larger projects, be it a campaign or a particularly large initiative where they feel like they need to pull in outside expertise. And finally, we've touched on this already, client geography. In grant writing, again, it almost doesn't matter if your clients are local, national, or even international. You do have to think about some of the logistics that Linda talked about, but from a work-related standpoint, you could do the work just as easily from your home office for a group that's around the corner as you could for a group that's around the world. So that is one of the wonderful things about the grant side. So I will turn it over to Linda to talk about what kind of practice you'd like to envision for yourself.
Okay, and again, we have another poll. We wanted to get a lot of input from you, and we'll be, if we didn't mention this already, we have set aside 5 to 10 minutes at the end of this session to take questions and answers and discussion that you might have. But if you wanted to fill this in, we are interested to find out how many of you are thinking of focusing your practice strictly on grant writing, since most of you are most likely grant writers as you're members of GPA. But some of you may be thinking more of full service consulting, and looks like, and maybe some of you haven't even thought this through yet, and that's fine too. But let's see, it looks like the majority of you, 75% of you at least, or actually a little bit higher than that, are thinking about full service. Somebody asked a question about what we define as full service, and basically what we mean by a full service consultant, and you may not be covering the gamut of all of these services, but most full service consultants do capital campaigns, feasibility or planning studies. They may help with major gifts. Some of them may help with plan giving. A lot do board development, board training. Maybe some are doing coaching and mentoring. There's a whole variety of services that you could offer as a consultant. So I see now that we've described that a little bit more fully, we may have some people jumping into that category where they're interested in being more full service consultants. But still, I think the majority of you, it's almost 3/4 of you that are looking at focusing strictly on grants. And there's no reason that once you determine your focus that you have to stay with that either. You may start this business, as Susan indicated that she did. She started mainly focusing on grants. But then once you're in grants for a while, maybe you get bored, or maybe you are offered, as Susan mentioned, somebody says, well, gee, you do such a good job of grant writing for us. Could you help us with our annual appeal? We need to revisit our annual appeal a little bit, or we're going into a capital campaign. One word of caution is that when you're considering the services that you are going to offer, you should think about what you have experience in, because sometimes people get themselves into a situation where they don't want to say no to a client and, oh, sure, yeah, I can do that capital campaign for you. And then they hang up the phone and say, oh, my gosh, how do we do a capital campaign? I have no idea of that. And that's where we're going to get in a little bit to talking about structuring your business, where you may bring in other people to help you with some of those things. But it looks like the majority of you at this point are focusing on probably one single service, and that is grant management or writing, and possibly grant research, but definitely in the grant area. We have another poll that we'd like to take too, to see whether you want to focus on a single focus type of organization, or whether you want to work with all types of organizations. There are some people who really love higher education, and that's all they want to work in is higher education, or their experience has all been in healthcare, so they want to stick to healthcare. And there are definitely some advantages to that. You can really be well known as the person to go to for higher education grants, or the person that is a healthcare expert. but there are also many of you who are probably thinking they like the variety of working with different types of organizations. So again, it looks like the majority of you, more than three-quarters, about over 80% of you, are looking at working with various different types of organizations. So I think that's really something that you'll find, again, can change. You may start your business feeling that I really want to focus on all types of organizations, and there's some advantages of that. First of all, there are a lot more opportunities out there. If you're focused on higher education and you decide that you only want to work within your region, well, for most of us, there are maybe 5 or 6 higher education institutions in our areas. In a small community, there may be 1 or 2. In a larger community, there may be a dozen. But you're pretty limited if you're focusing on one type of organization. But then some of you might find after you're in the business a while that, gosh, I really enjoy working with arts groups, and so I want to focus all my energy on arts groups and become the subject matter expert. And it will probably be a lot easier for you to become a subject matter expert if you're really focused on one type of organization. And again, this depends a lot on your personality. As I said, I'm the type of personality that gets bored pretty easily, so I would probably never be happy focusing on one single type of organization. But I do know people who love working in the healthcare arena, and that's all they want to do. So there's nothing that's right or wrong about any of these options. One of the things that we stress in our book is, and that was the reason we invited 25 different consultants to give us their expert opinion in the different chapters, because there really is no right or wrong way to do this. It's what works for you, and that's one of the biggest things that sometimes people even might want to sit down and take some kind of a personality test like a Myers-Briggs or one of the DISC programs or one of the many different personality tests to find out what is the right job for you and what is the right type of consulting practice for you. So I think it'll be good for you to just think about these things, and this is why we're asking so many of these questions to get you started thinking about some of the areas that what is the right consulting practice for me. So to go along with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan, who's going to talk to you about where you want to work, because I think this has some real options available as well.
Great. Thanks, Linda. And this is actually becoming an increasingly diverse topic to talk about, and it really does impact your consulting practice more than you would think. As we all know, the home office does become an ever-present kind of workplace in your own realm, so that can hinder some people's interest in setting up a home shop, because if you're one of those people who has a hard time tearing themselves away from work, well then you're going to have a really tough time if your office is right next to your kitchen, for example. But there's also that idea that having a so-called real office might produce a lot of prestige. And that is thankfully, in my mind, going away a bit. I mean, I do remember very clearly when I consulted 12 years ago, was a fledgling consultant, getting a lot of clients. I live near Washington, D.C., so I'd get a lot of clients who worked in big glass buildings downtown, and they assumed the same of me. They assumed I had staff. They assumed I was working in a building just like theirs downtown. And I'd say thankfully that kind of stereotype doesn't exist anymore, because I would eventually, of course, let them know that I'm working from home, but it was not nearly as accepted as it is now. That said, if you are looking to work for clients who appreciate some of that prestige and status, getting an office might not hurt for you. So if you're looking to work regularly for universities, for hospitals, for larger institutions, sometimes depending on the type of group and the people that you'll be working with, there is still a cachet to the idea of looking at the address of their consultants. Some groups really want what they consider a so-called professional firm, and they consider a business address part of that. The good news is that these days there are so many options to really work from home a lot but still have that virtual address. So we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of renting out one office space within a larger office's lease. And so a lot of consultants that I know do rent one room out of a much larger space. And sometimes it's a complementary company. It might be a larger consulting firm where the two groups can actually share some clients and feed work to each other. And sometimes it's a totally unrelated type of business. There are other groups I know who, or consultants I know, who get space out of some of these buildings where no one in the building is permanent. So you get an address, you might even get a receptionist, and you get a phone number, and then you can work really wherever you want. You may get so many days allotted to you within a given month. Obviously you need to work in a somewhat larger city for that to apply to you. But there are really a lot of options these days. The saying that I probably love most about my home office is not having to dress formally every day. I think that's an obvious benefit. It is budget friendly, but again, if your personality type is one that you cannot focus well at home, then really it might not be as budget friendly as you think. There are fairly inexpensive options almost anywhere in the country if you're creative enough about it. And so if being at home is going to take you away from work that much, it is certainly worth looking into some of those options that are outside the home. A real office, most people would say, does have fewer distractions. And finally, if you're like me in a larger city with terrible traffic problems, I have to say the first couple years I was working from home as a consultant, every time I heard that there was a terrible backup on the Washington Beltway, I was silently cheering to myself that I was not part of it. So, so the commute is real because I get a lot of work done in the time where I might otherwise be commuting to an office. So even if you do get an office, think about where do you want to be located near your clients, or do you want to be located somewhat closer to your home because you're looking to make that commute shorter for yourself. Productivity on all levels is really a key piece of this puzzle about where you want to work. So ensure that you're able to get done everything you need to get done and be efficient about it. That said, I will turn it over to Linda about how you want to structure your fledgling company.
Okay, great. And before I do that, I want to just go back. Actually, I think I'm going to go back to the slide that Susan was showing, because I do think there's something to be said for all of these. And just I've been in business more than 20 years, and I've probably had all of these things except a virtual office. I haven't worked out of a virtual office yet, but I started my business by renting an office space in a building that had an address that was in a sort of a combination of commercial and residential area. And within that same building, I moved my office 3 times as I grew. I started out in a teeny little office, and then I moved to a different office that was upstairs on the 2nd floor, and then moved to a bigger office within that same building. That building happened to be located at that time right in the heart of the outlet district of Reading, Pennsylvania, which was one of the original outlet centers of the world. And we made sure that on holidays like Veterans Day, when everybody left Washington, D.C., and Susan could get to work real easily, they all came to shop at our outlet stores. And I knew that on outlet shopping days like Veterans Day, I had to either get into my office early and stay there all day, or not go in at all because I wouldn't be able to park if I lost my parking spot. So it was quite interesting. But then when I found moving home, I think that did make a difference. And somebody asked about having a post office box. I have had a post office box. I don't know if there's a real advantage to it. I think obviously having a post office box means that you can accept deliveries of things like UPS. You have to give a physical address for that. So it might be a little bit confusing, but I've had post office boxes. Now I'm just using my home address as my business address, and I don't really have any problems with that. So I'll maybe let Susan weigh in on that matter too. Do you have a post office box, Susan?
I do not. I'm imagining, again, it might depend on the type of client you're looking for. If you're mostly focused on grassroots or smaller organizations, it may not matter to them. I have heard a lot of anecdotal stories about clients looking at addresses. They do just want to know kind of what they're dealing with. Are they dealing with someone who's got a larger firm with staff or not? And sometimes they'll ask those questions in interviews. I'm not sure that it's a particular disadvantage, although, Linda, I personally have not seen too many consultants with post office addresses. How about you?
Not too many. Most of them either seem to use a virtual address, which means it really technically is kind of like a post office box, but it's not. So I think I've seen more people going actually to the virtual offices than I see renting real large offices, unless they're a very large firm. But like I said, I don't think there's a real disadvantage or an advantage to it. I think it's what's convenient for you. Remember that if you have a post office box, that means you're going to have to run to the post office every day to check that post office box, because you probably won't want to let it accumulate very long in there. So I think it depends, again, on what is best for your needs and what your physical location is like. I'm going to move on and talk about the structure of your company. And again, I've had almost all of these structures in the 20-some years that I've been, except sole proprietorship. I never opted for that because most people don't opt for sole proprietorship because there is some personal liability attached to that. I started my business as a subchapter S corporation because at the time I started my business, there were no LLCs, at least not in the state I was incorporated in. So I started as a subchapter S because my accountant recommended it to me, since there is not really personal liability attached to that. And then I actually became a partnership for a while, but it was an unusual situation. It was a partnership of two companies rather than two individuals. I had my consulting practice for a while, and then I met another consultant, and we found that we had some complementary skills. Actually, she did a lot of grant writing but wanted to expand beyond grant writing. I was doing more capital campaigns, and so we formed a partnership of our two companies. That partnership was active for probably 5 or 6 years, and then we just had kind of a parting of the ways because we had different business goals in mind. And ironically, when we started the business, we were concerned because she was a few years younger than I am, and she said, well, maybe I'll be wanting to grow the business and you'll be ready to retire. And it turned out that what dissolved our partnership was that I was ready to grow the business and she didn't want to. So it was kind of an interesting situation. Now I have started a new business as an LLC, and I'm phasing out the subchapter S corporation because I decided to go back to using my name. I've always used a fictitious name, and right now my sub S corporation is actually Cornerstone Consulting Incorporated, doing business as Capital Venture, and I just opened a new business, Linda Lizakowski LLC. So I'm trying to phase out some of my consulting practice and go into more things like writing and coaching and teaching. So I've decided that the LLC was more beneficial for me to do that. So I think, again, it depends on your situation, and this is something that we're certainly not intending to give you legal advice. I would talk to either an attorney or an accountant or both and get their perspectives on what's the best form of structure for you. If you are going into a partnership, making sure that you've chosen the right partners and all of that is, I think, really important. If you're going to be a corporation, who are the stockholders going to be? The challenges of a corporation are that you're technically supposed to keep annual meeting notes, even if you're the only person that's a stockholder. And in my corporation, it was only myself and my husband were stockholders in the company. And I was 51% owner because I thought there were some advantages to being a female-owned business. So I think it really depends a lot on your situation and what's appropriate for you. I will say that I think more and more people are becoming LLCs these days. It seems that's one of the trends that I'm seeing. And I don't know of any consultants. Well, I do know of one or two that are sole proprietors, and they're very happy with that, and they are content with that. And there's probably a lot less paperwork with being a sole proprietor than there are with being a corporation. An LLC, my accountant has told me, and I haven't filed taxes yet as the LLC, but from what I understand, the LLC will go on my personal tax return even though it's a separate company. So again, talk to your accountant and your attorney and find out what is the best for them. I want to go back to the chat room because I see Rena, who asked about the post office box, said she was going more from the conversation about prestige. And I would think that having a post office box does take away a little bit from the prestige of having your own office, because people see a post office box and they assume that you don't have a real office. So you might want to just use your home address or go with a virtual office option, because that gives you the option of having a real live address. And in a virtual office, someone will be there to accept packages for you and things like that. So if you're looking at the prestige angle, I would say don't go with a post office box. Susan, you might have something to add to that, and feel free to do that. I'm going to turn it back over to Susan to talk about marketing your business, because this is a big issue that lots of people always want to talk about.
Sure, and I will say I don't have much more to add about the post office box. I agree with you, Linda, on that one. But I will just say I do have an LLC for my business, and it is quite simple. I do file as part of my personal tax forms, and there's really a limited amount of paperwork. Even for the startup itself, I was quite surprised, frankly, how little there was. So
right.
I think that's part of the reason why that option is becoming so popular. Actually, before we get to marketing, I think, Linda, you were going to go through some of the legal
I turned it over too fast.
Okay.
I do agree with Susan, even though, like I said, I haven't filed taxes yet as an LLC, but I know that filing them as a corporation was quite involved. And I had a big manual, like a 3-inch binder with all my corporate documents in, and even a corporate seal, which I never ever used, I don't think, maybe once or twice in the 20 years that I had my business. So I would definitely recommend the LLC, but again, talk to your accountant or attorney. I do want to talk about some legal issues that you do need to be aware of, because these are pretty critical things. And especially when you're thinking about expanding your business, and with grant writing, as we said, it's pretty easy to work across the country or across the world with grant writing. But one of the things that you do need to be aware of is state registration laws. About 40-some states in the United States, I believe it's 41 states now, require consultants to be registered. And most states have different types of registration where they have professional solicitors who are people who actually handle money, and most of them have to be bonded and everything else. But some states, even if you're a consultant like myself who never touches money, does not actively solicit funds for their clients, several of the states I've worked in actually required me to be bonded. So I think that's something that you need to be aware of, because if you're going to work in multiple states, it can get quite costly. Most of the state registration fees are running around somewhere around $250 to $300. Even with some municipalities like Washington, D.C. has its own registration requirements, and I believe you even have to maintain an office in Washington, D.C., if I'm not mistaken. Los Angeles, the city or the county, I think, has its own registration requirements. So sometimes you might have to be registered depending on where you're working, even though you're physically not working there and you're doing the work from home. If your client is there and you're their consultant and advising them on fundraising, and I've seen some states like Pennsylvania who took this to the point of even making some marketing firms register because they were designing fundraising materials, and they said they're giving fundraising advice, so they have to register. So you need to be aware of those state registration requirements. And in our book, we actually have a whole index with the latest information on how to get in touch with your state registration authorities and find out if you do need to be registered and how you need to be registered, how much it's going to cost. I know some states like New Jersey actually charge you for every contract you file with the state of New Jersey. At least they did when I worked there last. So you want to look into this. In some states it can be, the registration can be as high as, in New York State, I believe it's $800. So you want to make sure you're aware of that. The other thing that I think is important is the IRS regulations about contractors versus employees, because I hear a lot of people that are consultants with air quotes around them, I guess, who say to me, oh, well, I'm a contracted employee. And I said, what do you mean a contracted employee? Either you're a contractor or you're an employee, because the IRS has very strict guidelines about that. And if you're going to be provided an office space, business cards, somebody there is giving you direction on your work, the IRS is going to consider you an employee. And there are some nonprofits that try to hire what they call contracted employees so they don't have to pay payroll taxes. And you can get into some serious issues with that. So I would check the IRS regulations for two reasons. First of all, with your clients, if they want to consider you a contractor rather than an employee, you better make sure that they're not giving you what would be considered employee benefits. Then you also need to worry about that as you start to expand your business if you're going to hire contractors. And some of the things that you can really get into some issues with, I know that in the states that I've worked, I've always had to pay unemployment insurance and workman's compensation insurance, even for my subcontractors, even though they are not employees of mine and they obviously weren't going to collect unemployment from me. Some of the states I've worked in have required that I pay workman's comp for them, because if they can't prove that they have workman's comp, then you have to provide it for them. So you want to make sure that you are aware of your tax laws in your state and federal laws that might affect the way you do things like that. And then there's also liability insurance. Do you need professional liability? If you're going to maintain a real live office, you're probably going to have to maintain some kind of liability insurance if somebody slips and falls down your steps when they're coming to meet you in your office. Even your car insurance you need to check if you're using that for business. Somebody mentioned, can we tell them where to find out about state registration laws? In most states, I would start with your Secretary of State, because that's most likely going to be the person who handles it. It might be your Attorney General's office. Every state has a different, believe it or not, in Florida, it's the Department of, I think it's called Consumerism and Agriculture. Even though we have absolutely nothing to do with agriculture, that's who I'm registered with in the state of Florida. So as I mentioned in our book, if you do pick up a copy of our book, there's a whole list of the state registration authorities, and it'll tell you where to go in each state. There are also firms, if you're planning to work in multiple states, and you think this is just one more nightmare that you don't want to go through, there are firms such as Clearly Compliant, who was one of the authors, was a contributor to our book, that actually handle registration for nonprofits, and they could probably also handle it for consultants as well. So I would suggest, that you might want to start with looking at your Secretary of State, because that's usually the place where you need to register. And like in Nevada, we have to register, first of all, to do business in the state of Nevada. Currently, there is no registration for consultants unless you're a grant writer, ironically. The rest of us don't have to register. It's kind of a weird setup. We just passed new legislation here, so it's a little bit confusing. So now I think I'm going to turn it over to Susan and let her go on and talk to you about the next topic.
Okay, thanks. Well, as most of you can imagine, marketing your business, that could be a whole webinar in itself. So I think we'll just spend some time, and we're running short on time, so I'll run through the things that really seem to work the best for most consultants. Marketing can take so many forms, and really many of them can be successful. And as with many of the other things we mentioned today, a lot of it depends, the techniques you use really depend on your personal preferences and the audiences that you are trying to reach. So it can span the gamut from doing something very professional like writing in a journal. The GPA journal is a great sample of things you can do on the very professional side to I've met clients at neighbors' houses who just asked what I did and they ended up hiring me. So you really never know. It's always good. You always do have your consulting hat on whether you really want to or not. Obviously websites are the place people go these days to do some background information on you. Although unless your website is really a full-fledged library of free information, which many of them are these days with blogs and white papers and the rest, I'd say that a lot of your marketing a lot of your business will not come directly as a result of your website, but the website may be a reason that people decide that you are a credible consultant or not. That said, plenty of consultants, grant writers certainly among them, do not have websites, I've noticed. And so it's not necessarily a hindrance, but it certainly does prove credibility, and when all things are considered equal, someone is able to research you much more easily that way. Collateral materials these days, like brochures and fact sheets and sample deliverables, some of those things are becoming a little bit dated unless they are put online. So that takes us to social media. Almost anything you create for a client or otherwise can serve later as a document that you do post either on your website or you notify people through social media that you've got a sample of something. Obviously, if it was created for a client per se, you do need to change it a bit because typically those documents you create, you want to let them become the property of the client. But you can certainly change it, give it your own touch, and then use it as something to kind of promote the type of work you do and the quality of work you do. There are lots of consultants who use Facebook, certainly LinkedIn groups, Twitter, and blogs, and it really, again, depends on your market. I have to say that I am constantly getting advice from people that I should do more social media, but to be honest, I'm pretty happy serving my local or regional community and not necessarily looking to go nationwide. Even though I've done work in many states, I'm happiest doing it near home, and thankfully so far there's plenty of it. So I feel like blogging and getting people from all over the country to be engaged in my work is not always the purpose I'm looking to serve. So anyway, again, it's another example of doing what works best for you. Professional organizations like GPA can be terrific, as can the Association of Philanthropic Counsel, which is a professional association designed for small consulting firms. So those of you who are new to consulting might look to that group to find other like-minded consultants who are serious about their work and share a lot of resources and conversations. Networking is obviously always a good thing to do, whether it is online or in person. So LinkedIn groups do serve to do a lot of marketing these days if you are looking for larger audiences for yourself. Advertising, I'll be honest, I do find that a lot of consultants place ads and then will say later in a moment of true honesty that many of them do not come through for them. Then again, it does go back sometimes to that level of prestige. And if you want to garner a notoriety with a certain audience, you might place an ad in that group's trade newsletter or advertise as a sponsor at their conference. If you're in the higher ed world, for instance, you might decide to advertise with CASE or sponsor a conference. So again, think about your own particular goals rather than just feeling like you need to advertise because you're in business now. Speaking and writing, I'll just end by saying those can be some of the best ways to promote yourself and garner credibility. Although, as Linda and I can both attest, they do not pay terribly well. So you really need to do it, again, strategically and figure out which opportunities get you in front of the audiences that you would like. And when you're new, it's easy to feel like you're just going to go in front of whatever group will take you, but resist the urge and make sure that you're in front of the right audience for you. Okay, Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh no, this is me as well, setting fees. We could again talk for an hour about this, and I realize we're starting to run over a little bit, but it's important to realize that there are many ways also to set fees. All the things you see on the left are just part of the list of things that you will need to think about when you're setting your fees. So a lot of times it helps to work backwards, and any kind of traditional book about consulting can help you figure out how much money you think you need to make to pay for all of these pieces, many of which, if you're currently employed, your employer will be picking up. What I think is more of an ongoing topic in the consulting world is how do you set those fees? Should they be hourly, daily, project-based, or should they be a retainer, which is the retainer ends up being a monthly fee that a client will pay regularly to work with you. And again, there is, for better or worse, no right answer. I'd say of all the fields of consulting, grant writing is the one that probably has the most people who charge hourly because, as you all know, it can take so much more time to get at, or to figure out how long or short a particular project may take. So a lot of folks do charge hourly to ensure that it's a fair process. There are some clients that are skittish about that sort of pay structure because they might think, well, if you're a slow worker, then I have no idea how much I'll end up paying. The consultant side will tell you that it's very dangerous to do anything but that, because if you get into an organization you don't know and their processes are not set up as tightly as they might have told you during your interview, then suddenly you're spending that much time on a project that should have taken a small amount of time. So most people's fees are generally based loosely on an hourly structure, and then how you decide to present it to a client is up to you. The more experience you get, the more likely you might be to move away from that hourly fee. In grant writing, you have to usually start from scratch pretty much no matter what project you're working on. So doing something of an hourly or daily fee. The daily fee, of course, you can charge fractions of a day if you'd like, and that ends up being nearly hourly anyway. So those types of things tend to be safest for grant writers, whereas project-based and retainers are used still, but it helps to have a little more experience and be able to say with more confidence, I can do this project in X amount of hours and know for sure before you lock down that fee structure. Just to quickly go back before we move on about, there's a question about networking with other consultants. There are some networking groups on LinkedIn. I think there's one, an association of consultants. If you search on LinkedIn groups for consulting, you'll find quite a few there. Otherwise, part of the reason Linda and I are doing so many of these webinars and other sessions is that there's not a lot for consultants to the nonprofit sector. So other than APC, which I mentioned, there's not a lot of formal organizations. We're trying to start a movement on some level. That said, since we're running short, I'm going to turn it over to Linda, and much of what you're about to hear will be in our next session. So since we're running short on time, I guess we'll go through this quickly, and I'll encourage you to join us for our next session to hear the rest.
Okay, thanks, Susan. And those of you who do have to sign off, because I know we are a little bit over time, feel free to contact us individually or jointly. We have our email address on the last slide. because if you didn't get a question answered, we'd be happy to answer you one-on-one. But I do want to make sure that we have all the questions addressed. Somebody asked about the name of that association, and it is APC, the Association of Philanthropic Counsel. I want to talk a little bit about surviving and thriving. I think the key is being flexible. So many times I think the consultants who are really in this for the long haul have changed their services. They've changed the way they do business. They may have expanded the number of services that they offer, or maybe expanded the geographic scope of their services. Maybe they've hired associates because they feel like they want to expand services, but maybe they don't have the expertise, or some have even become associates for others and subcontracted. Maybe their work is a little bit slow, and that's the advantage of being able to network with other consultants. So one of the things that we do recommend is, looking for mentors and coaches, and there are people that are available. In fact, Susan and I offer coaching for consultants, and there are other people as well who do that. So I think, finding a consultant and a mentor that can help you with this, a mentor or a coach, might be really, really helpful for you. For those of you who do have to get off the call, I do want to point out our book, if you're interested in learning more about either the book or our consultant-to-consultant, our hourly customized one-on-one coaching. You can contact Susan and I, or if you have questions that you didn't get a chance to have answered here today, you can email us jointly at lizakowski-schaefer@charitychannel.com, and at that email we'll both get the email, and we'll each give you individual answers. Somebody did mention, this is a hard question, but for fairly experienced consultants, are you aware of an average income? The GPA has a consultant salary survey, which is really good to know. It's very hard to come up with an average salary. I know consultants who are making 6 figures plus. I know of other consultants who are really doing this part-time, and maybe they're just earning some supplemental income. But I do want to open it up in case some people have some other questions. And if you saw the chat room, you can raise your hand, and we'll unmute those lines so you can ask questions. But we certainly would open this up to people who are interested in asking questions in any of these fields.
Thanks, Linda and Susan. As Linda mentioned, if you do have a question to ask verbally, please feel free. There is a button that says raise hand. You can raise your hand and dial *7 to unmute your line.
Oh, here's a good question. Can I work full-time and open a consulting job business on a part-time basis? And we actually wrote, I think I wrote an article on that topic. Personally, I would never be able to do that, but I know many people who do. And I think it depends a lot. If you're one who's going to focus strictly on grant writing, you can probably easily do that part-time while you're still working full-time. The kind of consulting that I do, and I've never focused on, in particular, grant writing, I do more things like capital campaigns, planning studies, and it's pretty hard to walk into an employer and say, excuse me, I need 2 weeks off because I'm going to do planning study interviews in Oshkosh or something. So I think a lot depends on your personality, your personal life, if you want to have a personal life, or if you have a personal life. But I think that a lot of people do start out part-time, and that's a great way to find out if consulting is for you. Some people have started it while they're doing a full-time job and then find out that they really enjoy the consulting and are ready to say goodbye to their full-time job. So that's a great question. So thank you, Jasmine, I believe it is, for that question. And again, going back to look at what your personality is going to fit into this whole process. Susan, do you have anything to add to that answer?
No, I think that was a terrific answer.
I didn't know if you had done it ever or not. I know I couldn't. But
no, I could not have done that myself.
Any other questions? Well, as Susan said, I do want to remind you that our next session is, I believe, January 9th. Is that correct, Kelly? I think we're January 9th. Oh, here's somebody that's the best local network for consultants and developing subs is our local GPA chapter, which has a large number of independent grant writers, and a LinkedIn group too. So thank you, Catherine, for that comment.
Yes, and I will confirm, Linda, that the next session is January 9th.
Okay,
and
great.
this is Susan. Unfortunately, I do have a meeting to attend, so I'm going to leave the rest of the questions to Linda, but thank you all for coming, and I do look forward to gathering again on the 9th, where we'll delve into some more advanced topics in consulting.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Do we have any more questions before we close out?
Linda, if you want to say your email address one more time, I know it's up on the screen. I'm going to switch the screen over to the survey so people have a chance.
Lysakowski Schaefer, and both of those names are not easy to spell, but Lysakowski is Lysakowski, and then a hyphen, and Schaefer is SCHAEFER at charitychannel.com.
Perfect. Okay, well, we just want to be conscious of everybody's time. So again, if you have questions, please feel free to email them, or you can email me at membership@grantprofessionals.org, and I will get all of the questions over to them. That concludes our webinar. We'd like to ask each of you to remain with us a few moments longer to take the survey that's on your screen. Please take a moment to evaluate the webinar and provide us with topics for future webinars. We'll be starting securing more webinars for the year after the holidays. Linda and Susan, I know Susan's not on here, but we would like to thank both of you for your time and willingness to share all of your information and expertise. Thanks to all of you who attended. We're glad that you can join us and hope that this session was very helpful for you in deciding whether or not you would like to begin this journey as a consultant. Later today, you will receive a recorded version of the webinar. Just a reminder, all active GPA members do receive the entire catalog of recorded and live webinars with your membership. And please take the time to visit the GPA calendar and view all of our future webinars for 2014. The second part of this webinar will be January 9th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and you will receive call details for that the week of. Again, thanks, Linda, and all of you have a wonderful and happy holiday.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.